Hey guys, I'm Aaron from PhoneDog.com, and you know what? Tuesday was a pretty big day for BlackBerry users, BlackBerry fans, BlackBerry fanatics, pretty much anybody that uses and likes a BlackBerry in the US, with the world to come in due time. Research in Motion and AT&T announced the BlackBerry Torch 9800. It's coming August 12th for $199 after, I'm sure mail-in rebate and new customer agreement. But it's cool on a couple different fronts. One, it supports BlackBerry 6, Research in Motion's newest operating system, and it's intended to compete a little bit more with the media-centric OSs like Android, iPhone, new features like WebKit browsers, some improved media functionality on the music front, and just a general revamp versus the BlackBerry operating system we've seen as of late. So the software is completely new, or newer if you will, and then the hardware is a new front for RIM as well. They've never done a slider, and they've never done a touchscreen and physical QWERTY combined in one design. So a new front there as well. So it's an exciting day for RIM, but the question is, this device, it's neat, it's new, it's cool and all, but is it going to match up with Android and with an iPhone, in the long term? And that's the question that everybody seems to be asking. So, my philosophy here is I approach it from three different distinct categories over the past 10 years. Several years ago, it was, we carried a smartphone or we carried a phone and it was just for work, and we rarely utilized a device outside of work. We used landlines, or we didn't use anything at all, or if we did, it was a basic, kind of crappy phone. So people carried around the clunky BlackBerry and said, I need this for work, I have to have it for work, I don't really care for it, but I need it for email, etc., etc. Then we went into phase two, where people started carrying a work phone and a personal phone. So they would carry a BlackBerry because it's fantastic at what it does in the email department. Enterprise uses it on a regular basis. So they carried that, and then they carried a secondary phone for personal calls. And I think as that field started, it was more basic phones, little clamshell devices, the camera phones, and then it evolved into smartphones to where people were carrying the BlackBerry for work and carrying the, let's say the original iPhone or, the G1 or something of that nature as their personal device because it was fun. So when the workday was over, when 8 o'clock rolled around, or 5 o'clock, depending on, what schedule they had, they throw the BlackBerry down and then they pick up the G1 or the iPhone or whatever, media-centric consumer personal device they had, and they would use it. So, they carried two. Now I think we're getting into a period, especially over the course of the past year, where iPhone, Android, they're obviously not to the extent, or obviously not as saturated in the enterprise market as RIM is, but, we're getting to this point where they have the ability to do some very similar things that RIM does in the enterprise market, and they're continuing to work to breach the enterprise market. So I think we're going to get to a point where people say, hey, I don't have, and we are at this point where people say, hey, I don't need to sacrifice, and get a boring device. I'll get an iPhone, or I'll get an Android device, or I'll get a WebOS device, whatever, and I'll make it work for business. Maybe I'm seeing this more in small business versus enterprise. It's entirely possible, and don't get me wrong, BlackBerry is still dominant, very dominant in the enterprise field. But I think we're seeing, an era here where people are looking at their devices and saying, hey, this is awesome. This is a cool device and it does my business stuff versus 5 or 10 years ago where it was, hey, this does my business stuff and yeah, it's kind of cool, or yeah, it's not that great. But we switched priorities to where it was business first and then what we want to do in our personal time last, to now where it's personal time. This thing's great at web, this thing's great at apps, this thing's great at media. Oh yeah, and it syncs my email for work. So, I think, and this again, it may be more of a prosumer argument, or it may be a small business, medium business, but I think that's where we're at now. And to that extent, the Torch is an awesome push for the consumer, for the consumer field for RIM. And I heard an argument the other day where somebody brought up the point that, well, they don't really need to appeal to consumers. They've never appealed to consumers. It's always been business. That's not true at all. If you remember back in 2006, early 2007, the Pearl line was intended specifically for consumers. It was marketed to a consumer demographic, and it was followed up with the Pearl, the revised Pearl, the Pearl Flip, the Storm 2. I mean, they have a history of working on the consumer field, and RIM's one of the few organizations that's done a great job of going from the business side to the consumer side. Whereas other manufacturers like Apple with iOS and Google with Android have really focused on the consumer side first, and they're migrating into the business field. But to their credit, RIM has done a great job of really picking up a business demographic and then slowly migrating into the consumer field and doing quite well at it. I mean, it's still obviously enterprise is still their bread and butter, But to their credit, over the past 4 years, they've done a very good job of breaching, the consumer front. The question, that everybody seems to be asking now is this Torch device. It's cool. It answers a lot of the questions that, some of the consumers and people that wanted more media-centric features have, or that they had rather. But is it going to be enough long term? I do think there's enough potential in BlackBerry 6 to appease current BlackBerry users. So if you have somebody that's on the fence, the 9650 or a 9700 or an older device like the Tour or the Storm 1 or the Storm 2, and they're looking to upgrade, they're saying, okay, I can either go Android or iPhone, whatever, or I can go Torch 9800. I think it's enough to appease them to the point that hey, I have awesome email abilities. They've done a little better on the social media front and in the web front, and in media in general. Let's pick up the Torch. So I think it's good enough on that front, but then I look at it from the perspective of somebody that's had an iPhone for 2 years or somebody that's had an Android device for 2 years. It may not be that exciting to them, but I think from the BlackBerry perspective, it'll certainly keep people from defecting from the BlackBerry platform, to another one. So good stuff there. Much more coverage to come on PhoneDog.com. We'll cover it. In the meantime, hit the comments section. Let me know what you think. I'll do my best to answer those. For PhoneDog.com, I'm Aaron. I'm going to drink my coffee, get back on the computer. Thanks for watching.